Hi friends, Miss Fox here. Today I'm going to read to you a story called My Baby Blue Jays. It's by John Berendt and he is the author. He's also the photographer, which means he took the pictures of all the things that happen in this story. This is one of the books that I'm reading in celebration of Earth Day. I hope you enjoy My Baby Blue Jays. I live in a white house on a quiet street in a big city, New York. There is a small iron balcony just outside the window of my office, which is on the third floor. One day, a blue jay landed on the railing of the balcony. It surprised me because I don't often see birds so up close. The blue jay inspected the balcony very carefully. Then he flew back to his wife in a nearby tree, and they chirped to each other. He must have told her that he'd found a place where they could build their nest. Do you know why I think so? Because he began making a nest right away. First, he picked up a strip of white plastic that he found in the street and he brought it up to the balcony. And then he and his wife added twigs and grass until the nest was finished. You can even see the original strip of white plastic. You can see it sticking out of the top. Very soon, Mama Blue Jay laid an egg in it. In fact, she laid 3 eggs. Then she stood guard over the eggs to protect them from cats or squirrels who might come along and steal them. I kept a lookout too. After a few weeks, 3 little blue jays were born. They settled into their new home and were very curious about anybody, like me, who took a close look at them. They did a lot of chirping and cheeping. Papa Blue Jay came back to the nest to see what all of the fuss was about. Aha! He knew the little ones were hungry. So he fed them by putting food into their mouths, right from his own mouth. That's just how birds do it. And what do you think he gave them to eat? Yeah, bugs and worms. After a few weeks, it was time for the baby blue jays to leave the nest and go out on their own to run around, to hop, and best of all, maybe to fly. At last, one of the little birds hopped out of the nest. When the other two saw him standing out there on the balcony, they cheered him on. They too were eager to hop out of the nest. And they did. Before long, all three birds were hopping around on the balcony. They practiced flying by flapping their wings, but mostly they hopped because they weren't strong enough to fly. Not yet, anyway. Soon it was time to get off the balcony and onto the ground. But this was a big step because the balcony is on the third floor of my house. There is quite a long drop to the ground. One of the birds looked at me as if to say, "Well, it's been swell here, but it's time for me to go." He looked a little nervous, I thought. But he gathered up his courage and he squeezed between two of the bars and out into the air. As he fell, he fluttered his wings frantically, not enough to fly, just enough to slow his fall a little bit. He landed with a thump, not a bad one though, and he found himself on the doormat in front of my house. Being a cautious fellow, he looked first to the left and then to the right. Then he took one last look back up at the nest. And without further ado, he stepped off the mat onto the brick courtyard and hopefully out into the big world. But first, he would have to make his way up a few steps to get to the street. He still couldn't really fly, and his hopping wasn't going to raise him high enough to get up the steps. What should he do? He thought about it for a while, and then he did two things at once. He hopped and he fluttered his wings. And it worked. That was one step done, almost to the gate. At last he reached the top step and he looked out through the gate at the sidewalk. Once again, he looked first to his left and then to his right. And then he took his first steps out onto 87th Street. Now his biggest worry was getting stepped on by people who didn't see him. So very quickly he hopped and fluttered across the sidewalk to the curb. It was much safer there. Okay, now that he was at the curb where the parked cars were, he thought he'd take a little walk with rest stops in between. Finally, he saw a nice spot for a pleasant rest. He hopped onto a wooden fence around a small garden at the base of a tree, a few houses up the block from mine. He was enchanted by a pretty pink flower. He'd never seen anything like it before. And he took a breather because his first walk had been a strenuous one. Nobody would make the mistake of stepping on him. Here, I thought I saw a smile of satisfaction on his face. Do you? Later that day, he came back to my moss garden to say goodbye. I told him I would miss him, but I would always remember him and his brothers or sisters because, to tell you the truth, I couldn't tell which birds were girls and which were boys. But I did know that the big bird who laid the eggs had to be the mama. Now the blue jay is all grown up. I'm sure I've seen him around the neighborhood, but by now he looks so much like the other grown up blue jays that I'm not sure which he is. He's probably one of the birds who fly into my backyard once in a while and take baths in my fountain, like this one. That's the end of My Baby Blue Jays. I hope you enjoyed this story. I've always liked reading this one because it's interesting. And I love that the author was able to see these little birds grow up right outside his window. Wouldn't that be neat?